Okay, today I want to go over with you, well, first of all, we're going to do exercise number 2. Exercise number 2 is going to have to do with more washes than that, but a different painting style, or not painting style, a different way of painting on paper. What I've showed you up to now on the video is painting wet onto dry, or dry onto wet, or no, wet onto dry, which means you have dry paper and you're putting wet water and paint together on dry paper. And what I want to show you today is called wet into wet, which is wet paper and then putting wet paint onto the wet paper. Now remember the rule. I told you the rule once before, and here in front of you I've showed you just a couple quick ones. I was playing around just before I started the video. I did the circle here and the tomato, and I don't know, I tried to do another pear here, this pear here, and then I did this quick little scene here with a nice little cloud, and that was done wet into wet. And then here you've got the, you know, the landscape, mostly cloud. You have a low horizon line. But anyhow, what I want to show you here is wet into wet. And remember the rule. Please remember the rule. You always, in painting wet into wet, have more paint than water on your brush. Your brush could never be, your brush can never be wetter than the paper. If the paper is wet, the brush should not be as wet, and it should have more paint in it, okay? Otherwise we get these blooms in that. I'm not going to show you that right now, but you know, I'm sure we'll get a few in class. But we don't want the blooms. They're like cauliflowers and they spread out. We don't want that. So what we do here is, like, for instance, if this was the paper right here, I would get some just some plain water, and I would wet the paper. Okay. Now once the paper is wet, now that paper is very wet. I mean, I'm only doing this side. So if I put paint in there, okay, I'm going to make sure that I have strong paint in there. Let's say if I go in here and I go like that, okay, you see how that blooms out? I mean, that just comes out. That's fine, you know, but you can't control the water. So you only have to have the areas wet that you want to have wet. Now if you want your color to stay pretty much in that area, you have to put just a lot of paint there to show. You notice the paint won't spread as far down as it does here because it's so saturated with paint, it stays in that general area, whereas here it starts to spread down. If I put a very watery one down there, especially if that starts to dry, and right now I'm going to do what we always do, you know, pick up the excess. Okay. Now if we put more paint on there, but not that much paint, see, it starts to go right down. It'll start spreading down further, especially on this board, because the board, you don't realize it, but I've got about a 35-degree angle. Now you've noticed in class that I paint up and down like I do when I do oil painting. It's much harder to paint watercolor that way, because if you're not good in managing your water, it'll drip. And some people don't mind that. Matter of fact, many artists like that dripping effect. It's considered very artistic. So here we get another one. Now, believe it or not, that could easily be made into a kind of sky. You know, don't have to do much to it. You just leave it alone. It becomes a sky, and that's how we do skies mostly, is wet into wet. Now, a lot of artists will say, no, that's not true. We can do them a million ways. Well, we can, but you're going to only know to do it that way because, you know, you get good at a couple good techniques, and then you can develop the other ones on your own. So here, let's change this around here. Put in our other piece of paper. Okay. Now, I'm going to take our flat brush, I think. Okay. And we're going to wet the paper. And sometimes when you wet the paper, a lot of artists who do a lot of wet and wet technique, they often use put just I like dirty water in that respect because it gives a little tint so that you can kind of see what you're painting on there. Now I don't know if I can show you that. I'm going to put a little paint on it on purpose just to show you that. See, oh, but first of all, so I don't waste paper because paper's expensive. We'll do a scene right here. There, so I know that that's our paper right there in the corner. That's our area. So let's put in, let's wet it. Okay, you see, you can tell there's a little bit of color in there, just a little bit, and that's fine. Let's just add that in. We'll do a landscape scene here. Put a lot of water on there, and it's good to do that, but again, because you can see where you are in the painting. And you'll see that, you know, areas where you don't paint, I mean, if I wanted to leave that area blank like that, no matter what, water will not drip in there at this angle, which is great, you know, but I do want it covered right now to show you this, okay. Now, I'm just going to go almost down to the end of the paper. So now the paper's wet, okay. Now, doing skies, you kind of got to get yourself a little bit of paint, hold your breath, and just go for it. That's why practicing skies is important. You may blow it 3 times and then the 4th time you get it right. And eventually you'll just kind of know what's right. So if I just get a little bit, and if you know anything about, you know, the sky and that, it's darker on the top, it's lighter as you come down. Okay, so then let's get kind of dark here and just kind of do like a kind of a quick S, you know. No, there we go. Okay, that in a sense is the sky. You see how it bleeds nicely, it bleeds around, it's very soft, you know, and by itself it means nothing until you put in the midground and the foreground. Remember in class, some of you, I was looking at your washes, they were just basic washes. I mean, they were all right, they were good, but what made them something is you put a little bit of mountains on there or something to make it into something, all right? And so here you can tell that the clouds are just stratus type clouds, and they come down, they're very light here, nice down here as they get down the beginning, kind of dark up here, light here. You got a couple big clouds here that are in the forefront, you see, in the foreground. You see, it's just, it's kind of the, well, anyhow, the sky on top of you is closer than further away from you, so you get that idea here. Now, down here, while it's still wet a little bit here, if you want, you could take your brush and add a little bit and put in a little bit of a mountain, okay, and it's going to spread like this, you see. Maybe it's a valley, maybe it's not exactly a mountain, and maybe it comes down like this, okay. And then in order to blend it all in, you know, we can leave it like that. We can say that that's hard light coming in, or we can spread it out and just leave little spots of light like that. Now it looks like there's a little bit of light reflecting in from this way, the sun coming from the right hand side down. Okay, now that could be anything. That could be sand by the ocean, that could be the ground, and you notice it's fuzzy and that could be because of grasses and that. So you're just creating illusions with water, so you get that kind of an effect. Okay, now with that, now the foreground is going to be a little bit more prominent, so we'll come and we'll get some more paint over here. I have my little palette right over here, and we'll go in and get some really strong, what we call juicy paint. Okay, because see, all you're dealing with right now, and this is so important, is you're dealing with values. Values is what making the picture. It's certainly not color. There is no color. Now, most artists, I don't care whether they're doing portraiture, whether they're doing landscape, but most artists of the world will tell you more important than color is value. You can have all the wrong colors in a painting. You can make the sky green and you can make the ground yellow and everything else, but if you have the right values, you can get away with it. Some modern artists have done a wonderful job doing that. They get away with that because they know their values so well. if you have the right value, even if you don't have the right color in the painting or the color doesn't work, you get the right values, you can make the painting work. Okay, that's what's so important. Now here we've saturated brush, put in a little bit more, and just doing something like this, I mean, any of you can do this. I mean, this is not, you know, that's all. I mean, that's adding a little bit. We know that that's here in the foreground. Now if I took, if I let that dry a little bit, and I can even bring this down here like we did there a little bit, and I don't know, I mean, there's no justification for doing that. There's no reason I have to do what I'm doing. My brain just says do that. Okay, well, I did it. Alright, so I did it. So there you go. There's the ground. There's the ground in the background. They're not mountains. This is flat, you know. Mostly sky, because I was showing you how the sky is going to look when you put the sky in wet into wet. Once you put the sky in, do not go back in. Do not go in right now and start messing with the sky. Then you're going to get these ugly blooms. And that's not good. All right. So now we just leave it like that for a second. Now I have not showed you the rigger before. Here's the rigger brush. But I'll show you how we could do little trees here. If we want, we can put a couple trees here. And I'll just wet the rigger brush. I'll get myself a nice little soupy mix of paint here. Okay. And what I'll do, and when you, maybe we'll do pine trees or something. I mean, something like that. I don't know. Something that, you know. And the way we'll do that, you know, we can start like that, you know. A little bit more paint on there. And who knows what kind of tree this is. Okay, it works. Now because it's still a little wet, gotta saturate it with paint. Okay, now here's a good example where you have an area here that I have a little bit of space where I didn't paint. That's okay, leave it alone, doesn't matter. Okay, you'd be surprised, this is not like a coloring book where you have to stay in the lines or you have to do everything a certain way. Maybe here you just want a little bush. Okay, so we'll just do a little bush here. Okay, and maybe here another bush. Okay, maybe now let's see, what could we do? Maybe here, you know, we haven't really spoken about composition yet in that. You know, I'm trying to get you just to be fluid enough with the brush that we can start doing simple compositions. But now I can now go in here, you know, maybe a little bit of I don't know what they call it. I'll show you with the brush though. You know, like oh, grasses and that, you know, you can sit here and you can do something like this. Twigs. Okay. So here's an example. So I've given you an idea of a wash here. Wet into wet though, this time, not wet into dry. The paper was not dry. Pre-wet the paper. I put in the clouds. I put in a faint, there must be a mist or a fog in the background. You can tell that this part of the structure is in the background, and then in the foreground I have this tree and some twigs and that. All right, a little bit of sun coming through over here. You can see there's a little opening there, and so we're getting a little reflection here on the, you know, on the prairie or wherever you are.